Welcome back, everybody, to the 1867 Sports Show. Kyle and Kyle are actually both early tonight, and that is a feat that requires a golf clap for both of us here. Golf clap for the two of us.
Look at us go. Wow. What a rare feat that was almost derailed by technical difficulties. Right.
Almost
Sorry.
derailed, but we're still under the gun here. We're good. We made it. We're under the wire, but yeah, tonight's episode's an interesting one because we are on episode 36 tonight. And did you know that, Kyle, 36 is the perfect number? Do you want to know why?
Why is that?
It's the perfect number because it is a positive integer that is equal to the sum of its proper divisors.
You can really tell that we could not find a single player who ever wore 36, eh?
It is legitimately impossible to find a relevant number 36 that has a Canadian sports tie. Go Google it right now and then come back and listen to the show.
We will accept write-ins, so please post your mailing address now in the comments, and you can send it all to Big Kyle, and he'll be inundated with fan mail.
Absolutely, and I will write back every single fan that, and I mean that. I mean singular, because there's only going to be one fan that probably writes in, so that's okay.
Can't wait for you to be swarmed by carrier pigeons just dropping off all of these letters.
Yeah, just gonna relive my nightmare of watching the birds for the first time when I was little. But anyways, now that we're back on track to a Canadian sports show, yeah, obviously we didn't do a show last week because Kyle and I have jobs that we have to do outside of this podcast. We also have families that we have to care for outside of this podcast. So life got
Not to
in the way.
mention, Big Kyle has signed me up for 92 side hustles that I had to put into process over the last 35 episodes here.
I'm trying to put money in your pocket. I'm trying to subsidize this podcast so that way we don't have to rely solely on the Dine Sports Management Group. But if anybody out there needs anything from a sports related group to a media side, the Dine Sports Management Group is just a fantastic organization that you can hire for anything. They're up for it. Let's go.
Yeah, this is where it's blink twice if you are in danger right now, making that statement on camera there, Kyle.
No, that's part of my contract now. Now that we're on episode 36, I'm obligated to mention that you guys will do anything for money. So
yeah, it vested after episode 35, did it?
Oh man, well, let's start out with a positive note because obviously this came out last week, but we didn't have a show last week. But you probably have a very, very, very detailed opinion on what I'm about to bring up here. Because in the nation's capital, finally, for the 25th time, Ottawa has announced that the Senators will be getting their very own standalone arena at LeBreton Flats. So let's get a golf clap for the 25th announcement that they're going to get this entertainment district done at LeBreton Flats. Kyle, your thoughts?
Well, color me skeptical still until I see shovels in dirt, because as we have seen many times before, lots of announcements go out, and at least we've made it like almost a couple days now without a counter lawsuit being launched amongst the actual ownership group. So I guess that's a step in a positive direction.
Yeah, isn't it nice that there's not a Melnick-led, group that just will countersuit everyone and delay this process tenfold?
Yeah. Well, it's something that's been long overdue, and especially for any Sens fans who constantly have to hear it's the arena in the middle of a farmer's field there, it's out in Canada, it's this, it's that, this is going to be absolutely massive for the franchise, provided that it goes ahead as planned. Now, like you just mentioned, I think removing a certain chef from the kitchen, we'll just say, will probably make this a much smoother process. And the fact that they've actually brought a whole bunch of people who were heavily involved in the first, second, and even third attempt to get this up off the ground, Cyril Leader and some of the other executives that ultimately parted ways with Melnick towards the end of his tenure there. They're now back in the fold. They have existing relationships with, NCC and the various stakeholders that you need to appease in order for this to happen. So it's all sounding good. But we've seen this movie before. We're just hoping for a bit of a different ending. But I am cautiously optimistic that it is going in the right direction, just based on, the last 365 days of I've had some concerns about the on ice decisions, but largely the off ice decisions. I think Michael Andlauer and his ownership group have really tried to overhaul that culture there and are trying to make inroads not only with City Hall, but the NCC and all the other people that ultimately need to sign off on this if this thing is ever to actually get greenlit and, 5 years from now, which is their current timeline, dropping a puck in a new entertainment district right in the heart of the nation's capital.
Yeah. And I mean, I think from the Andlauer standpoint, he's pretty much delivered on everything that he said he was going to do when he initially bought this franchise, which is kind of a breath of fresh air and not having to listen to the bill of goods that was trying to be, sold to everybody for the last 25 years with this franchise. So I think that Sens fans and Ottawa sport fans in general can rest on that being the saving grace of potentially this being the last time that we're ever going to announce that they're going to get this stadium built at LeBreton Flats. Yeah. Secondly, you mentioned that they've got a lot of familiar faces working with this. So, I mean, I think the relationships that have been built up over the course of time with the city, with the province of Ontario, those are such key elements that a lot of people overlook, because I don't know if anyone remembers when Lansdowne was initially being brought to the table in the mid 2000s, that was not a very smooth process. And
as opposed to the absolutely silky process that LeBreton has been thus far for the Ottawa Senators.
Absolutely. But, fast forward now to when they got greenlit to go forward with Lansdowne, it wasn't even a unanimous vote. So, I mean, that's the one thing that people don't really understand, as well as I think a lot of people in the know would, is that Ottawa is a very difficult city to get things done. Especially when shocking truth being revealed in the 1867 fortune. But Ottawa is a very difficult city to get things done in, especially because you have so many moving parts to this thing with the new ownership group, with bringing people back who were involved in the first place, with having a new form of government who's overseeing the things in the city. Obviously, a new mayor. We've got different elected officials, not only at the provincial level, but the municipal level. This is something that could really take a quick turn for the good here, because we have a lot of different opinions as of what has been in the past. So I'll remain optimistic on this one, because like we've mentioned, there's so many different parts to this that are for good reasons that we can, hopefully move that ship going forward.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'll reserve my judgment as well, because as we've seen, I think, even when you and I were ringing for the Senators back in the early 2010s, this was like, yeah, it's a done deal. We're going to LeBreton Flats. We're going to be doing this in the next 5 years. Well, we're 15 years later, and we're still sitting in the same arena. But, at the end of the day, all it takes is the majority vote for this thing to actually finally go through. And then once the shovels hit the dirt, now it becomes a matter of, well, what was the geological, issue last time as opposed to this time?
I can't wait for them to find some sort of endangered turtle egg or something in there that delays the entire process another 5 years. But
it was funny too. I was having this conversation earlier today, and the thing that I really hope doesn't happen, because what they're planning, right? They're going to build the underground parking, which means that they have to dig down even deeper into the soil. So have they considered, okay, well, we've already gotten cleared to go underneath to build the arena, but you also have to take into account the underground parking as well. So if you're going down 100 feet, maybe we're still good. Maybe we've got, the right mineral grade that we need, and we have the right integrity that we need. But then we get down to the other 100 feet that they're going to be planning on going down. Now, is there going to be, like you're mentioning, any endangered turtle eggs, any skeletons that they find as they're digging? Like, who knows what they're going to find down there? And I think that's the most interesting part about this whole thing is, hey, it's kind of like the mystery box.
Yeah. Mr. Bopple, I found a spearhead. Ralph, that's your trowel blade. But again, like, jokes aside, it is a very interesting development here, right? Because if you look at even just recent history of some of those other players that you were mentioning there, and Sutcliffe is now mayor as opposed to Watson, and all of a sudden he was going on. I don't know if he's got stock in some sort of buildings downtown that he's hoping to sell to them for a premium, but was just lobbing out all of these alternate sites that, oh, I suggest that they go here and there. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like, this has been a decade plus of us just trying to get to here. Could you only imagine the amount of red tape if we're now demolishing buildings in other parts of town? And like, so again, the fact that they didn't get sidetracked and have to go all the way back to square one,
Yeah.
and restart this decade plus long process and essentially just say like, hey, the last guy who blew this up isn't around anymore. I'm much more willing to work and play nicely with others and be the adult in the room, which is such a refreshing thing to see from Senators ownership, which you can't say that we've seen in large, healthy doses over the years. So, I mean, it's an exciting time too, just because like I guess the fans in Pembroke and whatnot will probably be a little bit pissed off because they won't be able to get there quite as easily. But there's just so many more people that are going to be able to access this and access it easily as well too, right? Like walkable, it's on the O train if it ever gets working. Like there's a whole other process we need to get sorted out, but just across the bridge from Gatineau as well too. And if you've looked at what a lot of the endeavors the Senators have been releasing lately, they've been putting a ton of emphasis on trying to capture some francophone fans because they know how close we are to the Ontario-Quebec border there. And so that
Yeah.
was something that they did in the past to small doses, but it kind of felt like pandering, like, oh, we're going to do the bare minimum to say that, yeah, we're the bilingual, NHL team here. Now it seems like they're really trying to make some inroads there. And even some of the stuff that they're doing, just over in Gatineau and doing some of their events at like the Slush Puppy Center and this, that, and the other. And so they're trying to bring in some fans that probably would have been, Montreal Canadiens fans, if not for the fact that, oh, you got them at an early age. And when they were playing whatever, Timbits hockey, suddenly they started going to Senators games instead of Habs games. And now you've got fans for life. So it's smart on multiple fronts. And, again, no concrete timeline's been provided. They're kind of saying 5 years. In my mind, I'm thinking, 2030 season is probably when this will ultimately end up happening. But $1 billion getting pumped into revamping downtown, where again, I don't necessarily ascribe to the moniker, but it's the city that fun forgot is what a lot of people around the country kind of view Ottawa as. So having a complete overhaul of the downtown core, a stone's throw away from Parliament Hill, like you're going to be having a truly unique venue there. And what I
Yeah.
love the most is the quote that Andlauer dropped there. It shouldn't cost taxpayers money. We want to do this and it's got to be sustainable. I also don't want our fans to be paying $200 for a ticket and $30 for a beer and $50 for parking. But in any event, that's to be looked at. Golf clap to him because in a world of David Teppers, be a Michael Andlauer here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And that was actually very refreshing to hear. And, I'll revisit the Valley, subject you brought up because, like you're saying, there's going to be a lot of sore folks out that way, right? Because obviously being in Canada, it's a shorter distance for them to travel to come watch the games. But rest assured, once that, the light rail system comes out there by 2056,
Yeah.
you guys good. You guys can just hop on that GO train and get right into downtown. So you'll be good.
When they're ready to renew their 30-year lease at Le Breton because their first one has already lapsed, that's when all those Valley folks will finally have the GO train going.
And that's when they're going to get all of those like personal seat licenses from the Valley because they're going to invest. It's going to be a GO train ticket and a seat. It's going to be a combo pack. So look for that 2056, everyone in the Valley. But again, great news. Happy to hear that there's some optimism surrounding this announcement as opposed to the previous 24, which had both 70% negative feedback versus 30% positive. So let's just hope everything.
Say, 25th time's the charm, buddy.
25th time's the charm. That's all it takes. But yeah, let's just hope that this goes through. Sticking with hockey, kind of a unique story, that's been coming out the last few months that not a lot of people have talked about since, he's been back in the league and whatnot. But Patrik Laine, former number 2 overall pick behind Austin Matthews, former, Richard Trophy contender, I think every season that he was in the league for his first 3 or 4 seasons. Obviously, he's kind of disappeared from the NHL landscape in the last couple of years. And again, he was in the player assistance program. I think he had some mental health issues he was dealing with, and ultimately came out this past, May, and said, I'm looking for a fresh start if I'm coming back to the league. I don't want to play with the Columbus Blue Jackets. I'm looking to, kind of re-engage my career somewhere else. And to the Columbus Blue Jackets' credit, they look at that situation and they said, what's best for him is to get him in a situation where he's going to be comfortable, he'll be happy, and at least we'll be doing right by the player. And again, we talk about doing right by the player and right by the teams, often on this show. This is a situation where I actually applaud the Columbus Blue Jackets for their approach with this whole situation. But again, Patrik Laine was traded to the Montreal Canadiens. And for anyone who has been following kind of where the Montreal Canadiens are in their rebuild, this is kind of the year that people are expecting them to take that next step up and compete for the playoffs. So what are your thoughts, Kyle, by adding in a guy like Patrik Laine with all the potential that he possesses and the goal-scoring prowess that he has into a lineup like Montreal that could be that next contender that's growing?
Yeah, well, couple of things there, right? Like number one, again, I think I've been a pretty staunch advocate against do right by the players if it's ultimately going to hurt you in a trade there. This is one where I'm actually on the opposite side of the fence when it's going to be something like Laine, who could very well have just quit the sport altogether if he needed to continue to ride out his time in Columbus. That's an instance of do right by the player. Not, well, Tarasenko's wife lives in Florida, and so he really wants to go there. So, okay, we'll get 30 cents on the dollar for you. And weird, you won a cup yet, but good for you. You did right by the player there, Staios. So, again, this is an instance where I think a change of scenery is going to do a world of good for him. Because you look at how his career started, right? Like wonder kid coming in there, challenging Matthews for the scoring title, and 44 goals in his sophomore campaign. And then as soon as that ill-fated kind of PLD Laine swap ended up happening, his career really cratered, right? Because you look at the seasons after the trade, 21 points, 56 points, 52 points, 9 points were his season totals. Now, some of those obviously weren't full seasons. And, just this past January, as you mentioned, went into the player assistance program. So there was a lot of stuff going on, but clearly it was not working out for him in Columbus. Some of it was probably the culture that was going on there. Some of it was probably the coaching, right? Like, going and trying to live under, at that point, a end of the leash John Tortorella in his tenure behind the bench there. Probably not the most easy coach to play for. And you kind of saw, played one game for Winnipeg, put up 3 points in that game. Then he went over to Columbus, and then he had 21 points in 45 games the rest of the way. Clearly, he wasn't meshing very well with whatever was going on over there. So again, change of scenery was a good thing. Even if they got a bag of pucks back for him, you know what? An instance of do right by the player. The only thing that's concerning to me is for someone who is looking to revamp a career, is Montreal really the best place to do that? Like, talk about the fishbowl of all fishbowls. And, the Toronto fans will take umbrage to this, but guess what? You are not nearly as passionate about your team as the Montreal Canadiens fan base are about theirs. So every little thing that he does is going to get dissected. So it's a little bit of a, I'll say, orange flag kind of going up there. Something to watch is just how he deals with that pressure, because it's not like he's going to Utah where he could literally just be, oh, great, we're just happy to have a hockey team finally. Whatever happens, happens. We're probably going to sell out every single game. And, our fan base is kind of still learning the nuances of following a professional sports club here. So it's definitely something to watch, but it is a good on paper addition to a team of smaller playmakers. That kind of is what the Montreal Canadiens are right now, right? Like even their pests, right? Brendan Gallagher's not a big guy, right? Nick Suzuki, not a big guy. Cole Caulfield, definitely not a big guy, right? So to be going out there and adding a 6'5", 215-pound winger, it's not a bad thing, especially if he even comes close to getting back to his perennial 40 goal ish kind of prowess that he was displaying in his first couple of seasons in the league. That's a huge get, and it's a huge addition to your top six and power play for a team that is kind of, like you were mentioning, pushing their chips in and saying, all right, rebuild's over. We're now no longer happy to just go out there and get reps for the kids. Like, we want to vie for a playoff spot. And you see that in, I can't remember the name of it, but they've done the full documentary now of following this team. And usually when those docs come out there, they come out because they feel like they're ready to get there, not whoops, we're picking in the top 5 again this season.
Yeah, I think it's actually called The Rebuild, if memory serves me correctly. So
very original title.
Yeah, very appropriate name for what they're going through. But yeah, 100% agree with you. I think that a guy like Laine is such a unicorn in today's NHL because, like you were saying, you don't get many 6'5", 220-pound wingers who can score like he can. You hear those numbers and you think, oh, that guy's going to be a third liner like a Milan Lucic. He's going to go into the corners and just maul everybody. Patrik Laine is a finesse 6'5", 220, right? He can skate. He's got a great shot. Actually, is very good with the puck. And again, you look at the numbers that he's put up with predominantly defensive first clubs, they've been pretty good. So I think you kind of look at the situation of, yes, he's going to the market like Montreal. That could be very overwhelming for somebody who's just coming off of the player assistance program, right? But you also look at the situation that you just mentioned, him playing for a coach like John Tortorella. Imagine the breath of fresh air it's going to be to go on the other side and play for a guy like Marty St. Louis, who by all intents and purposes is the most beloved coach in Canadiens history so far in his tenure. So I think it's a good situation because it's like a free lottery ticket that the Canadiens are, going forward with here. It didn't cost them anything. They're putting a guy in their lineup who can, like you mentioned, can play top 6 minutes, can be on their power play. And you can also have him there to really maximize what you're really looking to do, which is get your first overall pick from a couple of years ago, Yuri Slafkovsky, to take that next step to be that dominant player, right? You get somebody in the center of those two guys with Slafkovsky and Laine, that could be a pretty formidable trio. If you've got like a Kirby Doc or, if a Suzuki kicks down to, center that line, right? So I love the move because I think that it's a really good risk to take because at the end of the day, if for whatever reason he doesn't pan out for Montreal, they can say, okay, you know what? We move on. Let's get the next guy up here. We're in that, position to do so. For Laine, you hit the nail on the head when you said things can go bad in a hurry if he's not producing. But can you imagine if this guy scores 40 goals for the Montreal Canadiens and leads them to the playoffs? He'll never have to buy a meal ever again in Montreal. He will be so embraced by that city, he'll never want to leave. So you look at all the bad things that can happen when it comes to being in that market, like a Toronto or a Montreal or a New York or an LA. Like, it's very volatile. But on the flip side, if you can do something that not a lot of people have been able to do, because I think I saw a stat the other day, like Carey Price in his time with Montreal, he played with one player that scored 80 or more points. Alex Kolev. So you think about kind of changing the tide of where Montreal's always been. I think since I've been alive, Montreal has never had a 100-point score. I think that's an actual stat. I think the closest one was Pierre Turgeon, if memory serves me correctly. He had 97 or something like that. But you think about where they can go. Like Suzuki, he's already established himself as being a very reliable two-way player in the NHL. Now, can he take that next step to be that 90-point centerman like they envision him being? Possibly. Cole Caulfield, guy's just dynamite with the puck on his stick, right? Can he become a 30 to 40 goal scorer like he's projected to be in the NHL? Let's hope. Now you add in a guy like Laine, and then hopefully, again, the aforementioned Slafkovsky can take that next step up. You've got 4 or 5 guys who could potentially get you 25 or 30 goals. And statistically, if that happens, teams are in very good shape leading into a long, deep playoff run. Because as we've seen with these teams that have kind of won the cups in the last 25, 30 years, balanced scoring is the way to go. If you have a top-heavy line that all of your dependent goals are on that particular trio, you're pretty much hooped as soon as you get past the first round, right? So, again, I like where Montreal's at in the stage of, okay, we've already taken our lumps being at the bottom of the league. We've taken the players that we think are going to be the next phase of superstars. Now we're going to add in some lottery tickets, and if they pan out, great. If not, whatever. We didn't do anything to get them in here. So once a team is in that position, those are dangerous teams in the long run. So very interesting to see where this Montreal Patrik Laine marriage ends up. And I'm hoping the best because, again, whenever you see a player returning from something like a player assistance program and a mental health crisis, it's just a great story. And we'll hope that it ends up in the positive for all parties involved.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, kind of the stage that they're at right now, this is what a lot of these rebuilding teams are kind of at, where you end up getting a lot of very nice pieces on paper, like all the players we've already mentioned. Plus, you've got, Lane Hudson, who every Canadian fan is drooling over with all of his preseason play and his offensive potential and this, that, the other. And I think it bodes well for them for the regular season, right? Like they'll be frisky. But again, this is a team who you look up and down that lineup. It's not a lot of sandpaper there. So this could be one of those regular season teams who does very well and gets into the playoffs, but is a cakewalk to get over because they don't have, an all-world goaltender who will bail them out with a 55 save performance every night. And they don't have the ability to, get pucks in deep, big bodies and all these bruising defensemen and forechecks and all the little things that we always see every year that ultimately ends up being the Stanley Cup champion winning clubs. So again, I think Ottawa kind of took their lumps in that regard where they tried to get a little bit too cute with some of the additions there. And, bring in DeBrincat. He's going to be the one to get us over the hump, right? And, Toronto has seen firsthand in the playoffs, hey, we've got a lot of offensive firepower, but we end up floundering in the first round almost every single season just because, we're not built that way. But again, for a team that is rebuilding, that this is kind of the blueprint stage of where it's at. You get a team that can get you into the playoffs, and now phase 2 moving forward is going to be, all right, how do we reinforce that to make it a deep playoff team there? And whether Laine is still part of that discussion or not largely hinges on which version of him we ultimately get when he takes the ice this season in La Belle Provence.
Yeah. And sticking with kind of a similar situation of which player are you going to see week by week? We're going to go over to the NCAA and the football side of things because we mentioned him on the show a couple of times. But if you haven't seen the catch that Canadian receiver Alec Ayamenor made last week for the Stanford Cardinal, again, go watch it on YouTube and then come back and listen to the show. But shades of Odell Beckham with the vertical leap, the one hand behind the head catch. It's arguably going to be the highlight of the season in the NCAA, which is pretty significant because there's been a lot of significant plays thus far, and there's going to be more going forward. But this is a guy, Kyle, who really had his coming out party last year against the University of Colorado, obviously with Coach Prime coming in there, and Stanford pulled off an epic comeback, largely in part to the performance of Mr. Ayamenor. And everyone started to put eyeballs on him as being kind of a dark horse Heisman Trophy candidate because of the skill set that he possesses and what he was able to do down the stretch last year. He got off to a little bit of a slow start, but The last couple of weeks, he's actually been very, very, very scary in regards to looking at where his numbers could be. His quarterbacks have been missing him a little bit. I've watched a couple of quarters of their play, and he gets open. Like, that's what you want a receiver to do. The guy gets open. He's a big body. He's 6'2", 215, runs a 4.4. Obviously, he's got a very good vertical because he's jumping over defenders to make these unbelievable catches. But Stanford's not traditionally the passing attack that you want to be in as a receiver to get noticed. So there's some good weeks, and then there's some down weeks for Mr. Iron Manor. But as an NFL prospect, I'm looking at this kid and saying, you know what? He's definitely in the realm of that second to third round right now, given his physical tools and given the potential that he shows if he's given a proper quarterback in a system that allows receivers to kind of show their diverse skill set. So, again, don't know how much you've seen of him, but this isn't the next Canadian receiver who's coming up. And are we going to see him be the next Chase Claypool, or are we looking at maybe being a better potential prospect than that?
Yeah, well, again, like 90% of the draft process, it's all going to be on where he ultimately ends up, right? I think, health issues aside, John Mechie wasn't on the Houston Texans buried behind three very, very, very good wide receivers in front of him. We'd be talking about him a lot more this season than we currently are as well, too. So that's number one, is obviously where he ends up. But I think your assessment in terms of, late second round, early third round, but can really help boost that stock depending on what he does down the stretch. And as we saw, all it takes is one good 40 time, and suddenly you go from a third rounder to a fringe first round prospect of the NFL draft. He's going to get selected. Like, this is not a kid who needs to worry about, okay, am I going to be the classic undrafted free agent and have my agent check in with the CFL and make sure I got all my tryouts and all that there signed up. And he's going to get selected, and he's going to get paid very well for it. But right, you hit the nail on the head in terms of Stanford, because they're such an up and down team as well, too, in the sense of they're Jekyll and Hyde offensively. Some weeks they look like world beaters, and like you alluded to, 3 touchdowns and 294 yards against Colorado last season as his coming out party. Like, that's this kid's ceiling. Like, he's a physical freak. He high points the ball. He can jump out of the gym, right? Like, he's got all of the physical tools. The only knock on him is because he's not playing against grown men, he kind of uses that physicality to his advantage and doesn't need to create separation at this level in order to still catch the football. If he's going to develop into a true, wide receiver one for an NFL team, that's the part of his game that he needs to work on. It's just the technical aspects and his route running ability to create separation against NFL caliber corners who are going to be shadowing him all across the field. Now, the good news for him is that's the easier part to teach than the physicality. Much easier to, spend a summer working on the technical. All right, dig your foot in here. This is where you break. Here's your route tree. We're going to refine all of this good stuff, rather than, all right, Devonta Smith, we need you to put on 40 pounds and increase your vertical and like, some people just are what they are at this point, and that's fine.
Yeah.
He's someone who, if I were to kind of put a NFL comparable ceiling on him, it's AJ Brown, in terms of, if he's got a good quarterback, look at what AJ Brown does out there when he's a member of the Eagles, right? Versus what he was doing on the Titans. So it's going to be situation based. It's going to be, who is his quarterback? And it's also going to be, I don't think he's going to be like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, who comes out and blows the doors off in year one. I think he's going to be that AJ Brown, like, every year I am going to be a better version of myself than the year I was before. And now that I'm 25, 26 years old, I'm in that conversation of, maybe top 10, top 15 wide receivers in the game today. That's his ceiling. But again, we've seen many cautionary tales. He lands in the wrong offensive system, or he ends up with, out in LA with the Chargers, and they're going to run the ball 60% of the game anyways, and limit the amount of passing. we might not even be talking about him that much 3 years down the line from now. So he's definitely got a range of outcomes in front of him. I'm pulling for the kid, but yeah, the physical traits absolutely jump off the game film for him when you actually watch his highlights there. He's going to be playing on Sundays sooner rather than later. And, I think he could be someone who, with a very good pro day or combine showing, could even start flirting with early second round. And hey, is there someone picking at the back end of the first round? Like, I don't think too many people had Xavier Legette being a first round pick there, but this is the world in which we live in. Crazy things happen. Does someone fall in love with him as a prospect? Who knows?
Yeah. And the AJ Brown comparison is an interesting one because the development side is definitely something to keep an eye on with him. And you mentioned the Houston Texans with John Mechie, and I actually, liken his skill set now compared to where it could be in 5 years to a fellow Houston Texan receiver, Nico Collins. You look at where Nico Collins started out. He was a tight end in college, right? He was an undersized tight end. Obviously, he could move, decent blocker, not really the best route runner, but over time, he refined those skills in the pros. He's in a great system with Houston. He's got good coaches. Now he's got a quarterback who can, toss the ball anywhere he wants. And you're seeing the progression and evolution of Nico Collins into being a top 20 receiver in the NFL. When I look at that, 100% what you're saying with the A.J. Brown take, that's exactly where a guy like Iowa Manor can actually, see himself in the next few years if he progresses the way that we hope he does. Now, that ceiling we're talking about is extremely high. The floor, for instance, is it low? Probably not. But is it going to be in a situation where, we're going to throw him out there and he's going to be our locked and loaded number 2 receiver right out of the gate? Probably not. So again, if a team is patient enough with his approach, they have a system that's suited for his skill set that they can actually teach how to run properly, I think that he can absolutely be a top 15, 20 receiver in this league by the time he is 25, 26 years old. So 100% with your, assessment of where he is. And I think from what I've seen of him, there's really not, anything that's telling me he can't get there. Mm-hmm. Right? The consistency is one thing, and people always point to that. Well, he's not doing it on a consistent basis. Look, if he was in Texas Tech's offense that throws the ball 80% of the time and he's not, putting up numbers, I'd be a little worried. But he's in an offense with Stanford that's kind of traditionally been a ground and pound type offense. It's kind of like a Big Ten offense if you want to look at it that way. They run the ball first to set up the pass. Once they've established the pass, they can put up some numbers every now and again. But in the situation that they're in, I think that Stanford kind of limits his, projection in a lot of people's eyes. So we'll keep our opinions kind of fresh for whenever he does get drafted, and you and I can revisit this conversation in a couple of years. But I think that the future is very, very bright. And I think that as far as the Canadian standpoint, this is arguably the best receiver we've seen projection wise in the draft, probably in the last 25, 30 years. So let's hope the best and he can end out the season injury free. And if he does enter the draft this upcoming season, then we'll hope for a good combine performance so that we can shoot up those draft boards and maybe crack that late first round like we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Pulling for him, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on as well too. And so if you've got some deep fantasy drafts coming up there, put a little watch star next to his name there, and late round flyer. Who knows? You could stumble onto the next Nico Collins or AJ Brown here, or John Mechie, or whatever he ends up ultimately being at that next level.
Yeah. Speaking of next level, we did our CFL kind of mid-season power rankings a couple of weeks ago, and we were pretty confident in where every team kind of slotted and saying, you know what? Yeah, they look like they're in cruise control. This team looks like they're going to be bottomed out. And we were both on the same page with that. The one team that I think we were both in agreement that it looked like they were done and we could pretty much, cross them off the list of making the playoffs or being a contender were the Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
That is not how that conversation played out in any way, shape, or form.
What do you mean?
You, the complete this is a revisionist history at its finest right now. The single thing that we differed on was you had Calgary going up and Winnipeg going down, and I had the opposite. And we actually said the next time Calgary plays Winnipeg, we needed to put a beer on it as to who was going to come out on top. And Calgary is now in the basement of the Western Conference, and Winnipeg is at the top. So what do you mean? What do I mean? I mean, I'm right. Victory at golf clap for little Kyle here for having faith in the championship pedigree of the Blue Bombers, while you were riding a dead pony out there in Calgary.
Be that as it may. Now that you're mentioning it, yes, I do remember that conversation wholeheartedly. So
now that you bring it up, I do realize that I'm completely repeating that entire process.
All right, so let me rewind and go back to start out this thing. When I was giving my mid-year power rankings, I was not.
We don't record these things or release them onto the public or anything. People can't fact check us, right? Like,
only we recorded them. Yes, but I was not very high in where the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were. They didn't look like the team that they were when they were competing for Grey Cups year in, year out for the last 5 years. They didn't look like a team that had any fire behind. They looked like a team that was kind of worn out. They looked like a team that had kind of just going through the motions. And man, what a difference a month makes. Mm-hmm. Because the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are now surprisingly at the top of the Western Division of the CFL. And I mean, you ask anyone, even you, who said that, yeah, you know what, I'm still going to give them a little bit of a chance. No one would have guessed that they would be in first place in the Western Division. And I got to give kudos to, obviously Mike O'Shea, who's showing once again why he's one of the premier coaches in all of professional football, because he's rallied his guys and he's got them to a point where they're now in control of their own destiny heading down the stretch. And what a position to be in when you've got a home field advantage like Winnipeg to go into the playoffs hosting playoff games. So, yeah, I mean, where do you see it turning around over the last month? Because for me, I look at it, it's just they're playing very structured. They're playing great defense. Their offense is capitalizing on mistakes that the opposition is giving them. Pretty much what was winning them football games during their dynastic run for the last 5 years. And again, it's a great testament to how quickly things can turn around in a league like the CFL.
Yeah. Going on a 6-game winning streak there definitely helps your odds, and also doesn't hurt that there have been a litany of roster changes, injuries, and whatnot to their fellow Western Division CFL franchises. But yeah, I had obviously more faith in them than you did, but I won't take the full victory lap and say, yep, I had them penciled in. Grey Cup return, all roads lead through Winnipeg. I wasn't that bullish on them. So again, I think their turnaround is impressive, and full marks to that coaching staff and training staff and everyone else in the building who's getting these guys ready on game days here. Full marks to them. It's not easy to pull yourself out of a 2-6 hole to start the year, especially when you've been so accustomed to that level of success where it's like, all right, are we going to lose 3 or 4 games this season and just coast through? And, all right, we might as well start booking our hotel rooms for the Grey Cup, mid-season and whatnot. So it would be very easy for that franchise to have kind of turned on themselves and started doubting things. And, we've lost too many things here. And we've got to get back to the way that we did it 3 seasons ago. And, a lot of finger pointing. But I think a lot of it just comes down to they haven't changed a whole lot of the things that they were doing from the early season to now. I think it's largely just been they stopped shooting themselves in the foot quite a bit, where those early season, we're driving, we're in the red zone, and then costly turnover. And now instead of it being any points on the board, the other team's going down the other way, and now they're putting points up against us here. They've cut down on that a lot. And, when you go out there and you just play, like you were saying, simple, structured football, good things tend to happen. More times than not, if you've got two evenly matched teams, the more disciplined team wins the football game. And
Yeah.
this is a veteran heavy team that has stopped making those early season mistakes that got them into that 2-6 hole. And just by cleaning that up, it's not like they've all of a sudden, like you were mentioning, going from a Stanford to a Texas Tech air raid offense here. Like they haven't thrown out the playbook. They haven't made any gigantic personnel changes or anything like that. They didn't fire their coach mid-season. They kind of just stayed the course and leaned on that championship pedigree and said, listen, we are a better football club than our record currently indicates. If we can clean up a few of these little blips here, we're going to be all right. And the proof is in the pudding. 6 straight wins, and now you're atop the Western Division, and like you said, control your fate down the home stretch of the CFL regular season.
Yeah. And again, you just said the perfect line to summarize how they've been able to do this. The patience they showed and not making these knee-jerk reactions that we've seen a lot of these clubs make when things aren't going their way has really benefited them in this 6-game winning streak. How many times have we seen, oh, well, we don't know who our quarterback's going to be next week. We'll reevaluate it because, they threw a bad pass. Like, the fact that BC is doing what they're their own worst enemy. Like, pick a quarterback. You brought Nathan Rourke back to play. Yeah, he's going to make some mistakes every now and again. But every time he makes one, don't say, well, Vernon Adams is going to go in there. Like, that's not good for anybody. Saskatchewan, like, every time you see anybody making, and again, this is, being a young head coach with Corey Mace, like, he's making some, decisions that, again, he thinks are the best for his club, but maybe it's a little bit too knee-jerk. Saskatchewan's been kind of on a downward spiral. And then you look at these teams who are kind of sticking with what's been working. They're the ones who are ultimately making the biggest waves in the last few weeks. So the fact that a team like Winnipeg, again, can just understand and personify their head coach like Mike O'Shea, I mean, that just goes to show the impact that a steady, level-headed management system and coaching system can provide for a group of players. So, all this being said, I think the one thing we're overlooking is obviously the biggest reason why this team is doing so well. Ottawa product Liam Dobson, starting left guard for the team. I mean, obviously the biggest reason why Winnipeg is doing what they're doing. So let's give a golf clap for Liam for leading the charge and making sure that his Winnipeg Blue Bombers are on a good track here to compete for another Grey Cup in the Mike O'Shea era. And again, kudos to everyone involved for that, because I will absolutely eat my words. And you guys look like you're back.
Now that you've remembered said words, you will eat them. Yeah.
Listen, I was always considering myself in that category. I was just trying to drag you in with me. So now I made that perfectly clear that you were on the opposite side of it. I'm going to let you go, and you can go on the other side. So it's good.
There you go. So Winnipeg currently has the 3rd best odds to win the Grey Cup. Who do you venture a guess as having the 2 better odds than ahead of them right now?
I mean, is it Montreal and Ottawa?
Montreal's one of them. Ottawa is not the other one.
Is it BC?
It is BC. So the odds makers are still liking the BC Lions at plus 310. Winnipeg's at plus 340 right now to hoist the Grey Cup. So even though the Lions, like you were saying, it's a bit of a quarterback carousel and it's constantly reevaluating, is it Vernon? Is it Nathan? Is it some combination thereof, the two of them? The odds makers still like what they are seeing enough on the West Coast to give them a slight advantage over the perennial Grey Cup attendees out there in Winnipeg.
Yeah. I mean, it's not surprising. BC was kind of the preseason darling of the CFL before they even got Nathan Rourke back. But yeah, I mean, anytime you've got that elite level quarterback, that's going to give you a positive turn on whether people think you're going to compete for the Grey Cup or not. So, I mean, I think BC's still a contender. They've got too good of a team to be, turning out these lousy performances every week. So if they can turn it around the next couple of weeks, I think they'll be fine. Montreal obviously has been coasting, ever since they clinched their playoff spot. Now I think they've clinched home, at least one home playoff game. So yeah, let's see how their season finishes out, and then obviously Ottawa's been pesky. They've had a couple stinkers in the last few weeks, but again, they're fighting, they're competing. This is something you haven't seen from the Red Blacks franchise since they won their Grey Cup. So it's good to see. So let's just map out where everything's going to go, and who knew that Hamilton and Edmonton would still be in the running for a potential playoff spot 4 weeks ago. Who knew? But
Well, just had gone with Trey Ford a little bit earlier there would have been a moot point there. Just
this
make
is
that
the
GMs of the Edmonton Elks franchise there, and we'll call it a day.
yeah, this is the world we live in. But speaking of things that are overdue, the thing we're going to end off on tonight is something that we mentioned on the show before, something that needed to happen. And we're going to go over to the NBA because the Toronto Raptors have recently announced that finally Air Canada, aka Vince Carter, and his number 15 will be retired by the franchise and hung up in the rafters. So well done to Mr. Carter for pretty much launching basketball in Canada to the point where it's at now. And again, to the Raptors franchise for finally making that decision that should have happened 10 years ago, even when he was still playing. Like, you're not going to get a more suitable player to put up in the rafters first, as a Raptor than Vince Carter. Just going to rattle off some of the things that he did over the course of his career as a Toronto Raptor. So, averaged 23.4 points per game, 5.2 rebounds per game, 1.3 steals per game. He was the Rookie of the Year. He was a 6-time All-Star, 2-time NBA, and of course, the ever-famous slam dunk contest champion in the year 2000. So, I mean, the resume itself is just so astonishing given the time frame that he played in as well. Because you got to think, the shooting guard small forwards in that era were just dynamite. And Vince Carter was one of one. You didn't have another player like him in the NBA at that point. So the fact that Toronto was able to bring him in and Canada got to experience what Vinsanity was like and see him progress to where he ended up getting to, I think was just such a great thing, not only for the team, but again, like I mentioned, for the country as a whole. And I just always think back, imagine if they hadn't have made that draft day trade, Vince Carter for Anton Jameson. Now, Jameson probably would have had a very good career with Toronto, but would the Raptors franchise be where they are today had that trade not happened?
Well, I think there's actually a case to be made. The Toronto Raptors might not have a franchise if not making that trade, right? And I think a lot of people kind of lost in the shuffle of the Vince Carter era overlook just how dire kind of the financial situation was in terms of the Canadian dollar and its value. And you look at Vancouver, who, again, they have just as passionate a fan base of basketball loving individuals out there on the West Coast as they do in Toronto, but they couldn't make it work because they didn't have that star power and they didn't have that electrifying must see wherever they go, the hottest ticket in town individual, right? No offense to Big Country out there, but he wasn't exactly packing a lot of opposing stadiums to go see his exploits of the old turnaround jump hook.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, anyone who didn't see Sharif Abdur-Rahim play around that time frame, you really missed out. No, honestly, like, this guy was such a good player, but he got just absolutely lost in the shuffle because he played for a middling Vancouver team.
Yeah, but that would go on like 20 game losing streaks.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, you're 100% right. Because I mean, the impact financially that Vince Carter was able to bring in to Toronto with sponsors, with TV deals, with advertisements, like, ticket sales are one thing, but you can't last just on ticket sales. It's all the additional things on top of that. Like, they're getting nationally televised games on Christmas Day, right? This never happened with Toronto.
Yeah.
Until Vince Carter was there.
And the trade itself too, right? Like, a lot of people they gloss over the plus cash considerations part of it, right? No, like during that time, right? Because everyone knew, Vince Carter and Jameson, they were teammates at UNC, right? They were kind of viewed as like, all right, pick your poison here, 1A, 1B, not a huge separation between the two here. But with all the struggles that Vancouver was going through, Toronto was going through the exact same struggles. So that
Yeah.
giant cash infusion that they got as part of that deal actually helped them out quite a bit because you can make the argument that Toronto knew already they wanted Carter. So they got their guy, right? But the hundreds of thousands of dollars that they also got as part of that deal in flipping Jameson back to Golden State there helped them out tremendously, not only just in the cash infusion, and then it ultimately turns into sponsorships and ticket sales and all of that down the road as well too. But how the NBA was structured back then as well is where you got drafted determined your salary. So the fact that they got their guy at a slightly discounted rate as well too, because he went fifth instead of fourth, also financially helped them. So it was a master class in drafting in terms of the real world economic situation of a franchise that was largely on life support, like their Western Conference counterparts there, that ultimately turned into a franchise altering and possibly saving maneuver right there.
Yeah. So it was $1 million cash that they got from the Golden State Warriors. And with that $1 million, do you know what they ended up using it for? They built themselves a practice arena, which they still use today. So think about that. You've now got your very own standalone practice arena that not a lot of NBA teams had at that time, but you're able to get that with the money you accrued from the Vince Carter trade. So not only did you get the player you wanted, but now you're able to kind of build your infrastructure from the inside out with the additional assets you got back. So 100%. I mean, this is by far, and people can say what they want about the Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan trade. Like, that was the most impactful trade that the Toronto Raptors have ever made in the history of their franchise. Now, did it end the way that everyone wanted it to end? Absolutely not. Vince Carter went on to have a, arguably even better portion of his career with the New Jersey Nets at the time, and then played for 22 seasons. So I think he was second in the NBA for total games played at the end of the day, behind Robert Parrish. So the fact that he had the long career that he did, considering the injuries that he could have sustained, with the explosion that he had early in his career, think about the toll that takes on somebody when you're jumping as high and as forceful as he was, because he was an explosive jumper. That's ankles, that's knees, that's hips. Like, that's all those things that are being utilized so many times, practices, games, charity events, whatever it may be. And he ended up making a career out of the fact that he was durable, which near the end of his Raptors career, that was the biggest knock on him, was that he was, sitting out because of a hand injury. I didn't want to play because my knee was sore or whatever it may be. That's what defined him at the end of his career, was his durability. So I love the fact that he was able to kind of flip the script on, kind of where those biases were towards him. And the fact that he was able to return to Toronto at the end of his career, he ended up, getting that standing ovation, which was so well deserved, for what he did for that franchise. I'm happy that bygones were bygones, and, kind of the city and the country have, gotten past that, contentious era of him demanding a trade out of Toronto.
Yeah. And, for those that are listening now, I'm not going to rehash ancient history here because we actually already covered this entire saga on a previous episode. So go back and listen to that one there. But, the Raptors front office has blood on their hands in this as well, too. It's not like it's an entirely Vince Carter-led diva moment, although at the time it was kind of portrayed that way. But again, as history moves forward here, you can kind of look back with renewed clarity and go, maybe it wasn't as bad and as Vince-filled as we were led to believe at the time. Because that's the easy thing to do, right? Someone asks for a trade out of town. It's, well, screw you. You don't want to be here. We don't need you here then, right? So I think that was part of the reason why it's taken them so long to finally make that announcement, right? And it's also part of the reason why, to this date, no Raptors had their number retired. I think ownership has long known Vince needs to be the first jersey that goes up there. No disrespect to Lowry or Bosch or any of the other ones who you can make a case that their jerseys might also end up in the rafters one day. But it had to be Vince. And it was continually delayed by the fact that he just kept playing well into like his 40s. So again, I think it was kind of a foregone conclusion, but I like the fact that it's now been a long enough period of time that
Yeah.
even the fans who were maybe put off a little bit by how things ended, even a large percentage of them, there's still some diehards out there who still don't like Vince and whatever. Go argue with a wall. I'm not going to try and change your
Yeah.
opinion here. But it's given time for a lot of those fans who, have had some time to reflect on how things played out to realize, like, yeah, no, this was the Raptor of, this franchise's inception here, and there might not even be a franchise if not for all the things that he was doing both on and off the court to help support and pad that bottom line for that team.
Yeah. So given all that, let's just talk about some of the all-time Vince Carter moments with the Toronto Raptors, because I mean there's a lot of them. But to you, what are some of the most defining moments that you remember watching saying, oh my God, like I've never seen that before?
Well, if we're limiting it to the Raptors, right? Because the one that always sticks out to me, as I've said before, is jumping over, the French giant 7-footer in the Olympics. So putting that one aside, which would be my number one, I mean, the absolute number one, and I don't even see a world in which you can make an argument otherwise, is the 2000 slam dunk competition.
Yeah.
Right? That's what put Air Canada on the map. That's what put, the slam dunk competition back in, kind of the ethos of, oh, this is a main event, must watch TV. Because for a while there, it's kind of like it is now. There were just some stinkers that they were putting out there year after year. And
Yeah.
it was a lot of safe dunks. It was a lot of the same stuff that you had seen in years before. Like people had, and it's crazy to think now because like you look there and now there's high school students that are going, between the legs and East Baying it and 360 and, honey dipping it and this, that, and the other. That wasn't happening back in the year 2000. Like you just watch, forget the dunks. Go and watch footage of the 2000 slam dunk competition and watch the reactions, not of the crowd, but of the other NBA players. Like they're losing their mind. Shaq looks like he's about to have like an aneurysm at any point there. He's so blown away by what he's seeing. Like it truly was like a sports moment. Like when you were watching that live, you think back 24 years ago, you're like, I know where I was, who I was watching that with, what I was wearing that day. Like it was one of those things that's kind of just burned into your sports fandom right there. So it's absolutely number one for me.
Yeah. I think it's number one for any, Vince Carter fan or Toronto Raptors fan who remembers that time frame because, yeah, the iconic, they still show those today as, again, game defining, moments. Because ultimately, like you're saying, the fact that the players were reacting the way that they were towards what he was doing and them saying, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And no one I know can do that. So that's exactly what you look for in a spectacle like a slam dunk contest. It's like someone hitting a 550-foot home run in the home run derby. Like, no, there's like probably a group of people on one hand that can do these types of things. And at that time, Vince was the only person. He was one of one. So that 100% would be, I think, number one. One of them that really sticks out to me, and again, it's just kind of, I remember being, kind of hearing about it at the time and it being a situation where I didn't know what was going to happen. I think when it actually got announced, I remember where I was. I remember how I felt about it. It was when he signed his contract extension after his rookie deal was expired because Toronto had just gotten through that, epic run in 2001 where if he hits that, jump shot at the buzzer, they beat the Philadelphia 76ers in Game 7 and move on to face the Nets in the Eastern Conference Final. But everyone was kind of on pins and needles, thinking that, oh well, Orlando is going to be heavy after Vince Carter because that's where he's from. They've got a lot of money. They've shown that they're not shy to go sign guys like a Tracy McGrady a couple of years earlier. That's his cousin. He might want to go back and kind of run it back with the Orlando Magic. And I remember I was at work for the Ministry of Natural Resources. I was going back to the shop. We were loading up, all of the fire hose that came in from the BC fires that were going on at the time. We were loading them up to go and pressure test them, and we were listening to the radio. And I remember them announcing Vince Carter has officially signed his 6-year extension with the Toronto Raptors. And I remember I flipped the box of fire hose that I was working on that didn't need to be tested onto a pile of nails. So
great place to land.
I completely ruined this like $2,000 fire hose because of how I reacted to hearing about the Vince Carter re-signing. And I just remember thinking, like, this is the first time that as a Raptors fan, I've actually, been this happy, because at the time, every good player that Toronto had up to that point has left, either by trade or by leaving in free agency. So the fact that Vince was the superstar that he was and was willing to stay and sign that, max extension at the time for 6 years, that was massive. It was huge. And, I remember the cascading effect it had after that. Like Antonio Davis re-signed, and they re-signed Jerome Williams, and like all the main core guys from that 2001 run were all coming back to run it back. And obviously we know that injuries happened. 2002 kind of took a nosedive, and then, it progressed to the years of, oh, well, now we're going to be picking Chris Bosh at number 4 because we're terrible. And then we're going to trade Vince, and then we're picking number 1 in 2006 with Andrea Bargnani. And, those are the lean years we don't like to talk about as Raptor fans. But, to me, that was so significant that he stayed and felt that he wanted to be in Toronto for the next 6 years to win that championship.
Yeah. That's the Raptors, LeBron, the decision moment, right? Like it's literally the equivalent of it, where he was the biggest name in the NBA at that time and could have gone wherever he wanted, and whatever franchise he chose would have backed up the Brinks truck for him to acquire it. He was box office at that point, right? He was the needle that moves everything. So for him to have committed to a Canadian franchise like that, it cannot be understated what that did to elevate the profile of the Toronto Raptors. It went from this fringe, oh, are they going to go bankrupt? Are they going to start moving the franchise? They named themselves after a Hollywood movie that was hot at the time. They started at Skydome. Now they've changed their location. Like there were just so many weird quirks to how that franchise started that truly felt like the first, okay, we may not be the Boston Celtics or the Lakers or the whatever, but for one day, we kind of feel like we're amongst the big boys of the NBA, because the hottest name in all of basketball just re-upped with us here. And guess what? That's going to, like you said, start a cascading effect of bringing other free agents in and re-signing those that we already have.
Yeah. And again, free agency is not for everybody. Some people hate it. Some people think it's boring. That's ultimately the draft and free agency are, the most exciting part of the season for me. So, I mean, for a nerd who, looks into that kind of thing as being like the highlight of the year, whenever you get that type of moment, it just kind of sticks out. But, give me another one.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the other obvious one is that Game 7 versus the Sixers and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I'm gonna rewind it just a smidge, right? Because the year before, obviously, first playoff appearance, they just get swept by the Knicks. And all right, a gentlemanly, well done, boys. We got there. We had a little taste of playoff basketball, but just a spoonful. But then the next year, going back and actually beating the Knicks, because this wasn't a first round series against the Sixers here, like you were mentioning. They were literally inches away from that corner 3 from falling, of advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals there. And so you can almost full circle moment it to the bounce that they didn't get in that game. They ended up getting decades later when Kawhi's shot ultimately did fall there. But I remember watching that first round playoff series against the Knicks because it went 5 games because it again different format back then. It was best of 5, and so heading into Game 5, being like, oh my god, like they might actually win this thing here, right? And so I think that was another huge moment for the Raptors because it's one thing to get to the playoffs, it's another thing to show that hey, not only did we do it last year, but we're back this year. And oh, we've won a playoff round. And then we are going toe to toe with, if it's not Vince Carter, the other biggest name in the league at that time was Allen Iverson, right? And so that was fresh in his kind of like MVP years there. So it was very exciting to be a Raptors fan at that time because it got lean real quick after that for a long time as well too.
Yeah, and kind of sticking with that playoff run because I mean that was until they won their championship. That was really the the ultimate moment for the Raptors, right? To make it to
Ultimate
that.
what if moment there.
Yeah,
Had his corner three fallen. Yeah.
yeah, and I go back a couple of games because Allen Iverson, like you mentioned, that was the time frame that he was the most dominant scorer outside of Shaquille O'Neal in the NBA. The fact that he was only 6 feet tall is irrelevant. No one had handles like him. No one had speed like him. No one could get to the rim better than he could. He was literally the perfect offensive player in that time frame, right? Allen Iverson carried that Sixers team to that NBA final. The fact that Toronto went shot for shot with them was such a great feeling. And Allen Iverson goes for 50 in game 3, I believe. Game 4 comes around. Well, Vince Carter comes out and he goes for 51. Like that game, I remember what, again, I remember exactly where I was. I was sitting on my parents' couch in their basement
With a box
and
of fire hose on my lap.
box of fire hose flipping it on top of a box of nails. But no, but it's like I'm watching it. I'm literally ripped to every moment of that game because Vince Carter could not miss. I think he went 7 for 9 from 3. He was getting steals. He was getting these breakaway dunks that was just exciting the crowd. And you see all the players on that Toronto team, and they're looking for Vince Carter every time the ball touches their hand. Charles Oakley gets rebound. Where's Vince? Alvin Williams bringing the ball up. Where's Vince? Right? This happens when someone is just on an absolute heater. And the fact that Iverson had just done it the game before and Carter answered the way that he did, again, it showed that if you're a fan of this team, you've got somebody who you can depend on and rely on to take over a game. And again, such a great feeling as a basketball fan when you have that guy on your team. I mean, everyone saw the 2019 run where Kawhi was just the best player on the planet. No questions asked. Vince Carter arguably was the best player in that series, even with Allen Iverson. But ultimately came up short. But that just stuck out more to me than anything because the fact that you can come back and rebound and put up a better performance than arguably the best scorer in the world that just put up, that just again stuck out as we've got that guy. Just find him and he's going to take you to that victory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think hindsight's obviously 2020 here, but you look at how sideways that draft could have gone for the Toronto Raptors. Because once you get to obviously Jameson and Carter at 4 and 5, can you name the 3 players who went before them?
Yeah, so that was 1988. So that's Michael Olowokandi.
Yeah.
Rafe LaFrance.
Yeah.
And Sharif Abdur-Rahim.
Mike Bibby.
Mike Bibby, yes.
Mike Bibby.
Yes. Sharif Abdur-Rahim is 4. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, it's one of those things where, and this is no slight against any of them. Like Mike Bibby ended up having a very long career, and I think he may even have made a couple of All-Star games over the course of his career. But like if Toronto misses, and one of those franchises goes out and grabs Carter, you end up with a Rafe LaFrance. Like I raised some serious questions about whether Toronto would still have an NBA team right now,
Yeah.
or would they be applying for a joint WNBA and NBA expansion bid right now, right? So,
Yeah.
like, it's just one of those sliding glass door moments there where I remember the draft, and then it was again like instant trade. It's like, well, what's going on here? Like, we just took them, and again, I've said my piece about it, but the NBA is the dumbest league in terms of announcing trades on draft day because they still have the team go up there and put on the cap and all of that, and then they don't even in their post-mortem. Anyways, I've complained about it on previous episodes. Don't need to go down that rabbit hole again. But just the confusion of, well, what's happening here? Okay, they got Carter, but now it's Cash is also coming back, but Jameson's in the Raptors uniform, and now they're doing a jersey switch. So just the chaos of all of that. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you end up with the first player that you're ever going to retire their jersey versus Rafe LaFrance or Michael Olowokandi or Mike Bibby, right? Like
Yeah.
that's again another one of those moments that just sticks out as like, wow, we really, came out on top with any possible scenario. There's a 1 in 100 chance of this working out, as good as it did. We ended up somehow hitting on it.
Yeah. Can you name the two players in that draft who have more career points than Vince Carter?
In that draft?
In that draft.
98. Was that also Nowitzki's year?
Dirk Nowitzki. Yeah.
Okay. And
he's ESPN's favorite drunk NBA commentator right now.
Drunk NBA commentator right now. Uh,
Boston Celtic great.
Boston Celtic great. Drunk commentator. I don't know who you're talking about.
Paul Pierce.
Paul Pierce. Oh, yeah. Okay. The truth. Okay, yeah. Anyways, I was picturing another ESPN commentator that just had some live stream shenanigans. I was like, I think you're confusing sports right now. But...
No, that's definitely not where I was going with that. But yeah, Paul Pierce, has had some questionable takes and behavior since his departure from the league, but ultimately was a fantastic player and scorer for the Celtics and the Nets and the Wizards. And yeah, Dirk Nowitzki's career kind of stands alone as the greatest international player to ever play the game, and obviously he scored a shitload of points and won a championship with the Mavericks. But yeah, I mean, what a draft that 98 draft was, because he had some absolute heat seekers in regards to game-changing talent. But then you have the aforementioned Olowokandis and Rafe LaFrances that are going 1 and 2, and then the Robert Traylor trade for Dirk Nowitzki, because I don't know if you remember, but the Milwaukee Bucks the Milwaukee Bucks actually drafted Dirk Nowitzki and traded his rights to the Dallas Mavericks for Robert Tractor Traylor.
Yeah.
So you talk about a trade that worked out well when you're trading down and trading for a player, as opposed to that. Didn't work out too well for the Milwaukee Bucks.
No kidding.
But anyways, I think that we can call her a night after that. But yeah, the fact that we're talking about Vince Carter in the year 2024 having the impact that he had for the sport of basketball in this country, and very well deserved number going up to the Raptors, and no one will ever be wearing that number 15 again for the Raptors franchise.
Yeah, and one final golf clap for a team we haven't mentioned yet, but my God, did they get a monkey off their back? The York Lions, first football win in something like 1,800 days there.
Since 2019, and yeah, the York Lions were definitely due for their first regular season win. They've been non-forfeited. Yeah, I actually know a couple of coaches there that have just moved to take over that team, and yeah, very happy for them. They're doing things the right way, and yeah, let's get some more university football talk in Canada going next week. How about that?